thanks to all the women and men who have served as essential workers during this unprecedented time in our world. You remind all of us of the power of presence, partnership, passion, and purpose. You have provided hope and healing during a time in which all of us have experienced changes and challenges, and I want to thank you for your many contributions. Now, for just a minute, let's go back to December 31st, 2019, New Year's Eve. There were enormous parties and large and small gatherings with families and friends. There was the annual excitement that goes along with the anticipation of beginning a brand new year. In that moment, none of us could have predicted just how challenging this new year would be. Now let's forward to the present. Today is October 29th, 2020. We are in the midst of a global pandemic that our world has not experienced since 1918. This pandemic has changed our personal and professional lives and has changed our world as we once knew it. And our colleagues and friends from underrepresented minority groups have been compounded by these events as we witness African American men who have higher mortality rates from COVID, and the Latino population having higher positivity rates. And because of the politicization of this virus, we have also witnessed xenophobia towards our colleagues and friends of Asian descent. We have also visually seen acts of social injustice that underscore the fact that structural and systemic racism still exists in this country. And the geopolitical stages around the world have politicized all of what I just described, making it complex for our societies to understand the safe and plausible paths forward towards believing in a better tomorrow. And our children, the next generation, are growing up thinking that this is our world. But I believe it will take leadership from all of us to create that better tomorrow. And when the world is spinning and there is chaos and uncertainty and fear, our teams within our organizations turn to us for comfort and directions. These are the times when they need our reassurance and guidance the most. So today I want to talk about how to focus in the midst of these challenging times, how to remind ourselves to pause and to take a step back and to listen with your heart and head, to mindfully reconnect to our sense of purpose so that we, as leaders, can usher our teams through the chaos to safety on the other side and help create a better tomorrow. Because there are people who need us to help them navigate this incredibly challenging time. And now, more than ever, the world needs your leadership to help see us through this. You know, there's a great story of a tribal leader from the Sans Bushman tribe in Africa. It is the oldest hunter and gatherer tribe that still exists in Africa. A young visitor to the tribe once asked the tribal leader, "How has your tribe survived and your people been so successful for hundreds of thousands of years?" The tribal leader pulled the young man aside and said, "Young man, tell me about the two most important days in your life." The visitor immediately replied, "It was when I was born, and it will be when I die." The tribal leader looked at him with disbelief and said, "Young man, you are only partially correct. Birth gives you the right to enter into this world, but the second most important day in your life is when you determine why you were born and how you fit into this world. And that, my friend, is why we have survived so long. We understand our purpose." So I ask you, do you understand your purpose? If you say it's your job, I can promise you it's not your job. Yet, when I ask people what is their purpose, they often talk about their job. But purpose in the search for meaning is something much bigger than a job. The nationally recognized writer Richard Leider wrote, "People with a sense of purpose have learned to let life question them and have moved the focus of all their attention and concern away from themselves to others." Purpose, then, is not a job or a role or a goal. It is a belief that our lives, our part in the whole of things, truly matters. Having a profound sense of who we are, where we come from, and where we're going, we choose to believe that mattering matters. I want to repeat. It's when you choose to believe that mattering matters. My life matters. You see, purpose is a mindset. It's a choice. It is first and foremost the choice to choose to live our life, despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. It is the choice to bring who we are, our gifts and energies, to whatever we are doing. You know, before I came to Johns Hopkins Medicine, it was during a time when I was becoming even more reflective about my purpose. I had been at Duke University Health System for 32 years and served as the president of Duke University Hospital in Durham, North Carolina, for the last 8 of those years. And I was at a stage in my career that I am sure some of you are in. When you start to think, how do I want to spend the final years of my career? Or even bigger, how do I want to spend the final days of my life? And what will be the purpose? My purpose. As I talk about moving into those final milestones in life, for the younger people on the call, you may think, I've got a long time to think about this. But actually, it happens much faster than you think. Even though I started my career in healthcare over 35 years ago at Duke as a staff nurse in oncology, it seems like yesterday. And I can still remember my first day as a nurse. And I bet many of you on this call can still remember your first day and reconnect with the passion and purpose that you felt on that day. As I've thought about these questions, I recently read a qualitative study that was completed on people over 65 years of age. They asked them, what would you do different if you could live your life over again? The themes that emerged were enlightening. Many said they would be more reflective. Others stated they would recognize when it was time to push the pause button and stop for a moment. And the one general theme that made me question myself was when they said they would become more courageous in living their life. And I asked myself, have I been courageous enough? I knew what my purpose was in the context of my personal and professional life at Duke and in Durham. But as your life evolves, your purposes change. And my purpose in Baltimore and at Johns Hopkins Medicine is much different than it was at Duke and Durham. When I first arrived in Baltimore in 2018, someone asked me what I planned to do for Johns Hopkins Medicine. And I said, first always, put the S after John. All kidding aside. I told this person that I plan to be whatever the organization needs me to be. And that may be different than what I thought my purpose might be. And as we continue to navigate the current impact of the pandemic, social injustice, and geopolitical implications on our societies, our roles and purpose will certainly continue to change as the days unfold. And so I continue to think about those larger questions in leadership. Do I know when to push the pause button, or do I just keep going? Do I take the time to be reflective, or spend most of my time in caught up responding to the chaos? Or have I even developed hurry up sickness? So for a minute, let's go back to my first year at Duke Hospital. In 1985, when I was a new grad, only 6 months out of nursing school, I became the charge nurse on evenings and nights. Now, I got to tell you, I don't recommend this, but the unit leadership had to. It was during the last nursing shortage, and they didn't have enough experienced nurses to take the charge role. I was in charge on one of those evenings that I'm sure you all have lived, that if anything could go bad, it happened. I had a code on Team 1, and halfway through that code, the team called a code on Team 2. I was running back and forth from one side to the other. And as the evening started to calm down, there was a patient's husband who had been in the hall watching me run back and forth like a chicken with its head cut off. His name was Dean Bolton, and he was the dean of students at UNC. And he stopped me and he said, "Kevin, I need to teach you a valuable lesson in leadership. Crazy people will make you feel crazy only if you let them. Once you become a part of the chaos, you become a part of the problem. Leaders rise above the chaos so that they can separate the facts from the emotion and lead people to the other side." You know, his words ring true for me today. And in the midst of today's chaos, it even provides me more of a reminder of the importance of pausing and reflecting before acting. So when I look back on that moment in time and fast forward to today, I still ask myself, have I been courageous enough? Courageous enough to articulate my purpose, and have I lived out my purpose? What has been my role in making the world a better place, supporting the growth and development of others? And in the final years of my living, how can I live my life more purposeful? But as it is often true, to understand what I want my purpose to be in the final years, sometimes you have to reflect upon your own personal story. So today I want you to reflect with me on the stories that help create and define our purpose, and the individuals who are part of the stories that have gotten us to this moment in time. Let me begin by asking you a simple question. Well, now that I think of it, some of you may call it a silly question, but what do you believe is the real purpose behind the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and Santa Claus? Some of you might say cash. Some of you might say candy. Then, of course, there is cash, and there's presents, and then, well, once again, there is cash. All kidding aside. So my story goes, I was born the oldest of 3 children and grew up on a farm in rural Ohio. We lived below the poverty level. Now, this picture of my home, one of the things my mother loved about this home was she could stand in the living room and make the bed from the living room. Now, I didn't know we were below the poverty level because everyone else around us was poor. It's in this story that I'm also reminded of the power of perspective. We didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 7 years old. This is a picture of me and my brother at bath time every night. My mother would go outside to the well, pump the water, bring it into the house, heat it up, bathe us, then take the water back outside to get rid of it. I finally realized we were poor when I went to college. I remember coming home from college and telling my parents, you know what? We are really poor. Now, I need you to understand, even though we didn't have much money, I never felt as if we went without. Again, I've realized that sometimes it's all about perspective. But we can get caught up in the emotions of certain moments, and it's in those moments that we completely lose perspective. And it's also in those moments that I believe our purpose can become cloudy at best. You know, the holidays were big events in our families. Now, I need you to understand that I really did believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the almighty Tooth Fairy. Even though the Tooth Fairy only ever left me a quarter per tooth, and today I hear kids complaining if they don't see a 5, 10, or even 20 under their pillow. Why I believed in them wasn't about the cash, because we didn't have any. It was about the fact that I really believed in something bigger. There were Christmas mornings when I woke up and I saw that Santa had eaten the cookies we had left the night before. And there were mornings that I would see his footprints in sled tracks in the snow. He sometimes would even leave us a letter telling us about the times we had been really good and the times we had been especially bad. And I was amazed how much Santa actually knew about us. There was one Christmas as a child that the new Barbie doll had just come out. Now you have to remember this was the early 60s. And I told my mom that all I wanted for Christmas was that new Barbie doll. I wrote my letter to Santa telling him that that was all I wanted. It was only later in life that I learned my father had a fit and wanted Santa to bring me a G.I. Joe. But my mother told my father that this was not about G.I. Joe versus Barbie. It was about me learning to believe in something bigger. And so on that Christmas morning, the only present I received was the new Barbie doll. I look at that picture now, and clearly there were early indications of something bigger my family would have to deal with later in life. But trust me, that's a story for another time. Then one day leading up to the next Christmas, I was on the school bus coming home. I believe I was in 3rd grade, and I was seated next to April Perry, and I asked April what she wanted Santa Claus to bring her. She told me that there was no such thing as Santa Claus, and my mom and dad bought all the presents. My lips started to quiver. My heart felt as if it was going to pound out of my chest. And tears were forming in my eyes, but I was bound and determined not to cry in front of the person who had just destroyed my entire life. I got off the bus. I ran down the farmhouse lane, threw open the door, and began to sob. And I ran over to my mom and put my arms around her. She tried to comfort me, but had no idea what was going on. And after a few minutes, she said, "Kevin Ward, what is wrong with you?" You know, I always knew she was serious when she said Kevin Ward. I sobbed and said, "But Mom, April Perry told me there isn't a Santa Claus." She hugged me even harder and explained that yes, there was a Santa Claus, and we could talk about it more when Dad got home that night. After dinner, Mom and Dad read us a story. Some of you may have read it. It's called Yes, Virginia, There is a Santa Claus. My mom explained to me that while Santa was not a real person, his spirit lived in our hearts and in our minds. It was about believing in something greater that involved goodness. Goodness in yourself and your ability to support and give of yourself to other people. I learned in that experience that believing is a step forward towards understanding faith and imagination, each one having its own impact in our lives in helping us to define our purpose. Next morning, I got up, went to the breakfast table, and I whispered in my mom's ear, I've been thinking about this overnight. Does this mean there is also no Easter Bunny or Tooth Fairy? And I'll never forget. All she did was place her hand over my heart and patted my chest. And I knew exactly what she was saying. They would always live in my heart. Now, I cried over the loss of my childhood icons, But it would be only years later that I fully understood the gift of believing and the role it would help play in me defining my purpose. You know, when I first went to college, I was studying music, voice and piano. Barry Manilow had just told the world about how he writes the songs while he spends weekends in New England. And Donna Summer was talking about how she was some hot stuff. And Gloria Gaynor exclaimed, "I will survive." And I don't know about some of you, but "I will survive" was the only way some of us got out of the 70s. My parents didn't have the resources to help me attend college. So I was there on scholarship loans and whatever monies I could garner for the jobs I had. It was in those summer months back in 1980 that I began working in the mornings at the county nursing home, providing music therapy to the residents. I would leave midday and go to another nursing home in town at 3 p.m. and begin my work as an orderly. My job was to feed, bathe, and prepare the residents for bed. It was during that formative summer that I experienced the second most important day in my life. I came to the realization that my purpose was to make a difference in others' lives by caring for them. I wanted to become a nurse. I went home for Christmas break in 1980 with great passion and explained to my parents at the Christmas dinner table that I had decided I wanted to become a nurse. Now, here comes the lesson in this story. When you're surrounded by people who share a passionate commitment around a common purpose, anything is possible. But people must share your passion and understand your personal commitment to the purpose. Let me repeat. When you are surrounded by people who share a passionate commitment around a common purpose, anything is possible. But people must share your passion and understand your personal commitment to the purpose. Now, before I go on with this part of the story, you have to understand my father. When you look up macho in the dictionary, or even on Wikipedia, his picture will appear. He was a man's man, an Ohio farmer through and through. And I remember him looking up from the Christmas dinner table. I had just told him about the second most important day in my life. And he looked at me and said, "You will finish your music degree, and if you want to become a nurse, you can do that later. Not only that, nursing is a woman's job, not something for a man." Now, here's where you learn a little bit more about my mother and the power of believing. She looked down the dinner table at my father and said, "Sam, if our son wants to become a nurse, he will become a nurse. This isn't about whether you're a man or a woman. It's about, do you have the passion to care for other human beings during difficult times in their life?" If it wasn't for my mother and that moment where she connected with my passion and commitment to my purpose, I wouldn't be standing here before you today. Remember, when you are surrounded by people who share a passionate commitment around a common purpose, anything is possible. That was the only discussion we ever had in my family about me becoming a nurse. So I ask you, what stories in your life help to shape your purpose, and what stories are yet to be created that further advance your connection with life's even greater purpose? So as you further reflect upon your purpose, I want you to consider the 4 P's. Passion. Do you understand your personal passion and what drives you? Partnership. Do others around you connect with your passion? Presence. What does it mean to be present to fulfill your purpose? And finally, personal accountability. Do you understand the outcomes of your words, your actions, and deeds, and in short, and long-term impact on your purpose? Passion, partnership, presence, and personal accountability. I'd like for you to consider these constructs as we explore the impact of COVID health equity, social injustice, and structural and systemic racism on the impact of being a leader. At Johns Hopkins Medicine, we saw our first COVID patient on March 13. We began planning for the impact of the pandemic back in January of 2020. Our first priority was to create a safe environment for our staff. This required changes to our physical plants and required us to garner enough PPE to protect our healthcare providers. This is where passion, partnership, and presence come together. We had employees and community members volunteer to help us create fanny packs for every physician and staff member. These fanny packs contained a surgical mask, N95, a paper bag to put them in, and a face shield. We wanted our staff to have their PPE easily available. When we recognized that there may be a shortage on face shields, once again, our employees and communities came together, and the team set up a shop in a large warehouse where we were socially distanced and masked, and we created manufacturing lines where we created face shields for our workforce. Through their passion, partnership, and presence, they developed a purpose. The purpose of creating a safe environment for our frontline heroes. In watching the impact of the community spread of the virus in other countries and states, it became clear that not just one healthcare system could respond to the community's needs during a significant surge. I reached out to my counterpart at the University of Maryland Health System, Dr. Mohan Santha, and asked if he would be willing to partner with Johns Hopkins Medicine, the city, and the state to create a public-private partnership. Together, we spoke with the mayor, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the governor. We also included Care First in this partnership, one of our insurers in the marketplace. Together, we stood up a call center that responded to all citizens in the state of Maryland, answering questions about COVID, connecting them to testing sites and primary care providers as needed. We created a 250-bed field hospital in our convention center, jointly led and staffed by Johns Hopkins Medicine and the University of Maryland. All of our policies related to COVID and scarcity of resources were jointly developed by our experts between the two organizations. Together, we developed Go teams that went into nursing homes and homeless shelters where we tested residents and employees and provided infection control guidance on how to safely quarantine nursing home residents in place. Together, we also staffed 100 beds in a hotel to quarantine at-risk populations that did not have appropriate housing to quarantine. We set up testing sites at hotspots within the region. Together, we also developed a community testing site at the convention center to test 1,000 people a day. And today, our partnership continues as we plan for the second surge. As a leader, it was one of those moments that I paused and reflected and pushed the pause button. It was a moment that being competitors was not important if we were going to serve the needs of our community and state. It required partnership for us to fulfill our purpose. It was also at the beginning of the pandemic that our leadership team collectively agreed on the importance of Johns Hopkins Medicine being a source of truth that was based in science. We have stayed true to that commitment even today. It was our purpose as an organization. We now have over 200 basic science and clinical trials focused on COVID alone. In partnership with the Johns Hopkins University and every school on campus, we developed the dashboard that is now being used around the world to follow the positivity rates and deaths across all countries. Once again, a reminder of the power of purpose and partnership. I want to spend a moment reflecting on presence, passion, and purpose. During the first surge, as I was rounding on all of our COVID units across the system, I began to see signs of moral distress in the eyes of our providers. While I understand from a public health perspective why we couldn't allow loved ones in our COVID units, also known as hotspots, the impact on our providers of watching patients die without their loved ones present was not the manner in which we were taught to deliver patient-centered care. Now, granted, the staff made tremendous efforts to connect loved ones via video conference and telephone, but I think you would agree it's still not the same. As the surge continued, we began to hear from our employees of the impact of what it felt like to be in PPE for a 12-hour shift. I also began to hear about their personal fears of taking the virus home to their families and the daily routine of going home, taking their scrubs off inside the back door, putting their clothes in the washing machine, and immediately heading to the shower before hugging or touching their loved ones. Many described situations in which they were also caring for elderly parents at home. When schools did not reopen, parents also needed to worry about assuring that homeschooling was taking place. They spoke about how they felt that whether at work or at home, they always had to be on. As is true for many health systems across this country, 40% of our employees make less than $50,000 a year. Many of those employees had two jobs or someone in their household who also had a job that allowed them to pay all their bills. In the midst of this economic impact, many lost their second jobs, and others in their household lost their jobs. We began to hear from employees who did not have the means to pay their basic bills and provide food to their family. A grateful donor provided a gift to us that allowed us to assist people in paying their bills. We have also partnered with a food distribution company and have been providing meals and now boxed meals for a week to that segment of our workforce. We're also planning a holiday box so that this segment of our workforce can have food on the table for the holidays. We've also created a temporary child and elder care benefit to cover the incremental cost of child and elder care during this state of emergency. We've purchased computers for children of employees who don't have the means to have computer access for their children to learn at home. I share all of this with you because as I reflect upon the trajectory of what happens during a crisis, in the beginning there is this surge of adrenaline that feeds the passion and purpose and drives the presence of our people within the workplace. The way we've historically gotten through these types of crises is that we were able to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Today, many do not see this light. And the compounding events that are occurring in our society are making this time in our history even more complex for anxiety and depression. You know, prior to COVID, I was worried about the resilience of our workforce in healthcare. But watching this experience, I'm even more concerned. In our own employee health plan, we've seen an increase of 26% for mental health admissions. We've also seen 1,300 employees being prescribed anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications, employees who had no prior history of mental health conditions. Now, I want you to know I'm pleased that these individuals have stepped forward and asked for help, but what I'm more concerned about is that I believe this is only a small reflection of the people who need or will need mental health support now and in the future. We have partnered with our psychiatric department, which is now providing on-site personal services to our workforce. We have multidisciplinary teams of professionals that have been trained in helping individuals and teams with PTSD that travel our units on a daily basis. We are developing a training module for our leaders and managers on how to identify individuals who might be at high risk. We need to normalize that it is okay to ask for help and take away the stigmas that are attached to mental health needs. You must also develop a strategy for you to take care of your own mental health needs so that you can continue to be present for the people who need your leadership and support. This will need to be a continued high priority for leaders as we move forward. I believe that future competencies of leaders will need to be their ability to show authentic compassion and listening skills within the workplace and be ever more present with our entire teams on the front line. You see, I believe this highlights the importance of presence, passion, and how it becomes a key driver of purpose. I want you to remember that our purpose is an active expression of the deepest dimension within us, where we have a profound sense of who we are and why we are here. We must not lose sight of this in the midst of this moment in our history. COVID has also reinforced the issues we continue to face around health equity in this country. While I know and understand the complexities of this on a personal and professional level, I believe we need to have this as a competency for future leaders in healthcare. How do we further advance our DMPs in incorporating this into their learning, but also into their roles within our health systems? Having grown up in poverty, I'm always amazed at people who state, if they only would get an education and job, it would be better. As many of you know, it's a little bit more complex than that. In many of our communities, we are witnessing third and fourth generations growing up only knowing poverty. And we understand the implications of this on health outcomes. But what are the sustainable models that need to be created in this country to address health equity? How do we garner the passion, presence, and partnership to fulfill our communities to this purpose? While we have many community programs and research focused on this, I believe this is another area in which partnerships are required for sustainable models within our communities. This cannot rest on the shoulders of healthcare alone. It will take all of us coming together. This exemplifies why partnerships and teamwork are so important for us to deliver on our purpose. Remember, when others connect with our same passion, anything is possible. More and more, the world is looking to nurses to take on leadership roles, to come to the table to partner in driving positive change in this country. And that requires all of us to wear many different hats. And sometimes more than the one at the same time. In the book, The 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, author Mike Lesser writes about the Zen concept that each person has 3 different minds. He writes, there is the joyful mind, the mind that accepts and appreciates everything in life. There is the grandmother mind, the mind of unconditional love and understanding. And there is the wise mind, the mind that can embrace the reality of change and can be radically inclusive. The key to mindful leadership is understanding that all of these mindsets can effectively coexist, and that all are essential mindsets for leaders entrusted with making important decisions that can impact the lives of people for generations to come. But the truth is that it's not easy to manage all of these 3 mindsets while operating in the midst of our busy days. It takes mindful self-management to consciously adjust our behaviors in an emotionally intelligent way, so that we can be the support that our patients and families we care for need us to be in that moment, and so that we can lead others through the organizational changes necessary to ensure our long-term success. That's why cultivating leadership present is a deliberate choice. But to do this successfully, first of all, we need to understand who we are and know our strengths and weaknesses and how to manage them appropriately. And it takes a significant understanding of who we are as leaders and as an individual to remain true to our authentic self. The next topic takes passion, presence, partnership, and personal accountability. As a nation, we continue to witness acts of social injustice in this country towards people of color. As I stated in the beginning, it is a distinct reminder of the structural and systemic racism that still exists in this country. And what is happening is having an impact within our healthcare settings. I come to this conversation from a very different place. While you see me as a white man, and I recognize there are generations of white men behind me that created structural and systemic racism because of their white privilege, for me, coming to this conversation, I'm an openly gay man. And my fiance is an African American male. So on a very personal level, I understand conscious and unconscious bias. We are at a pivotal moment in our history where I believe it is critical for us to take time to listen to our staff's personal and professional experience around racism. What I've learned, though, that there are many layers to this discussion, and to act first without listening will not help drive the cultural change that is required to address this. But I've also learned that many leaders do not know how to lead and or facilitate effective conversations around race, or may not even understand what structural and systemic racism looks like. We cannot only rely upon our black colleagues to lead this conversation. Many of them are hurting from what they are witnessing within our society. It will take all of us to come together to listen and understand. This is another area that I believe will need to be a future competency for leaders in healthcare. How to effectively facilitate conversations around diversity and inclusion within the workplace. We need to train our leaders and staff in conscious and unconscious bias. What are microaggressions, and how do you respond effectively when you see them happening? What is structural and systemic racism, and how does it play out in the healthcare organization? And what are the strategies the organization will need to take to facilitate the cultural change to address them? This is not a time that is just about changing our policies and procedures. It is truly a pivotal moment in our society that requires cultural change. The peaceful protests around the world are a demonstration of the cry for something different. As leaders, we must listen to their voices and respond collectively. You know, I was recently rounding, and a group of white individuals asked me, why don't we come out with a statement that just says all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter? I first had to explain to them that this question was coming from a place of white privilege. We then had a discussion about what was white privilege. But then we began to talk about their personal views on the many examples of social injustice that we've all seen on TV. We also had discussions on how many of them were parents, and as white parents, did they need to teach their children not to wear a hoodie at night? Or if they were pulled over by a police, to keep both of their hands on the steering wheel and don't move as the police officer approaches the car. It was through this dialogue that they began to understand why Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is more than a movement, but a statement we are in changing the culture in how we treat and support one another, and how our systems and structures will need to change to support all people. You may ask, why is this an important discussion, and how does it play out in healthcare? There are white patients that state, I don't want a black nurse or doctor caring for my mother. There are staff of color that are being mistreated and verbally attacked by white visitors. This dynamic sometimes is also playing out in our teams within our systems. Do all levels of our workforce feel as if they have a voice within our organizations? These are some of the examples that I have witnessed in my career. Our purpose must be one that allows for all people to be treated equally within our healthcare systems. Both patients, families, our providers, and staff. This is a time where I believe our presence does matter. From the time life enters this earth until people in our communities draw their final breath, our nursing presence matters. As a leader, you must never lose the insight of the people you are serving. The purpose you play in creating an environment where the team can find their passion, establish effective partnerships, and it requires presence. So as you reflect upon today, I encourage you to think about, how do we bring purpose and meaning back into the workplace? Now, remember, it's our interpretation and approach to the past that generates resilience. Resilience happens when you stop living in your fears and start living your dreams and being yourself, and you focus on the incredible things that happen around you each and every day. Viktor Frankl said, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. These are important because you can't achieve purpose without holding yourself accountable. Personal accountability for your personal actions and choices. Personal accountability for the responsibilities you have in your life. And finally, personal accountability for setting and achieving your goals. You know, I found this picture of me, and it reminded me that anyone can be trained. It just takes time. I want to remind you, don't let others define your purpose. Take accountability for defining your purpose. Push the pause button. Reflect. Make sure you connect with your passion. Understand the importance of partnering with others to achieve your purpose. Stop and make sure you are mindfully present in the moment for yourself and others. And finally, hold yourself accountable to achieving your purpose. Take what may seem impossible at times and make it possible. You know, I've been this tall since I was in 7th grade. It was a little awkward being this tall because no one else was this tall. And I remember walking into my 7th grade history class, and my teacher's name was Mr. McDaniels. He was also the junior high school basketball coach. So when I walked into his class at 6'5", he thought he had just hit the mother lode. He saw nothing but a winning season in his future. And after class, he asked me if I would consider playing basketball. I, of course, said yes. But what did I know? I was only in 7th grade. When I reflect back on this story, I'm reminded how hard Mr. McDaniels tried to help me learn how to run down the floor, dribble the ball, jump up, and put the ball through the hoop. I mean, he tried really, really, really hard, but it never worked. Because when you grow up to be this tall in 7th grade, your long bones grow faster than your muscles. So coordination was not on my side. Now, here's where you learn the difference between short-term and long-term strategy. The short-term strategy. I did play junior high basketball. Let me tell you about my career. At the beginning of every game, I would walk the center court. The other 7th grade team would ooh and ah because of my height. I would tip the ball. Mr. McDaniel would call a timeout, and I would go back on the bench. Now, that was my basketball career. Now, the reason this is a short-term strategy is because when you're halfway through the season, the teams start to know they're going to send the tall, geeky kid to the center court and then pull him back to the bench. So it was halfway through the season that Coach McDaniel asked me to stay after practice. And I remember we sat on the bleacher in the gym, and I could tell he was nervous. And he pulled out a yellow legal pad and his ink pen, and he wrote the following word on the pad. The word was impossible. Now, I was in 7th grade, and I thought, this is not going to end well. But here's what he did next, and I'll never forget it. He put the pen in my hand, placed his hand on mine, and pulled it over and made me put an apostrophe between the I and the M, and all of a sudden, the word impossible became I'm possible. And here's what he said to me. I want you to be the scorekeeper. And I need you to know that I was the best scorekeeper that team ever had. It's only if we believe we are possible that we can fulfill our purpose and find our place in the world. Only if we understand that what we thought to be our original purpose may change. And the change in our purpose isn't always bad, because that change can introduce us to other possibilities and help us to further enrich life's meaning. What are your stories that highlight your purpose and the passion and the partnership, presence, and personal accountability required for you to achieve life's meaning? Just a reminder, it's your life. Live it, because it's your only life. Live it with passion, presence, surround yourself with caring partners, and hold yourself accountable each and every day to your goals and purpose that only you will completely know and understand. Now, I know this requires hard work on each of our parts. So today I want to leave you with a gift that you can pull out when things may not be going as planned. And a gift especially in these unprecedented times where the culminating events really begin to impact us on a personal and professional level. You know, during the Great Depression, there was a man who wanted to raise up the world to a different level. He was a young man that only grew up knowing poverty and hunger. And when I say his name, you'll think of a little skinny man with a little mustache and a hat on his head, and his ability to walk down the street swirling a cane. His name was Charlie Chaplin. And most of you are thinking that he gave the world the gift of silent film. But actually, in the middle of the Great Depression, Charlie Chaplin wrote music. And one of the pieces of music he wrote was to lift people up above that moment in time and have them see hope for tomorrow. To provide them a vision of something that's different than today. Just like our healthcare heroes do each and every day for the patients they care for. So when you're in one of those moments and you're feeling yourself doubting your next steps, or feeling the chaos swirling around you, take a deep breath and remember this. Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile even though it's breaking. There may be clouds in the sky, you'll get by. That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, there's no use for crying. You'll see the sun come shining through if you'll just smile. 'Cause smile, 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 ' Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Kevin, for your thought-provoking presentation and a charge to us as we prepare to lead from the future. So now the first question for you. Over the last several months, the Academy Board of Directors many times referred to VUCA, volatile, uncertain, chaos, and ambiguity, while addressing the changing needs of organizations and institutions during this pandemic. As you know, COVID-19 has forced leaders to both formal and informal roles to change their practices, create new models of care, and shift priorities daily and even hourly. How have you guided your team at Johns Hopkins to navigate these extremely uncharted waters?
You know, Mary, I addressed a little bit of that in the talk, but I think it's a time that it takes all of us coming together, and it takes a lot of people's ideas about how to approach testing. It takes all of our ideas. We partnered with our patient and family councils around visitation policies and how to balance the public health crisis and the need for no visitation and then bringing caregivers in. So it really does take all of us coming together to inform the different ideas, and especially when each and every day, it reminds me as a staff nurse in the early years of HIV, where every day we learned something new and the policies would change, the procedures would change, and getting people accustomed to that within your organization and communicate, and be open to others' thoughts and ideas, I think is an important part of driving through this type of crises.
The pandemic and national tragedies this year have demonstrated the sharp inequities in health and healthcare, while also exposing in greater light the social and racial injustice Black and Brown communities face. As a community, national, and global leader, how have you grappled with these grave challenges? And what advice do you have for leaders to be purposeful in assuring that social justice is an integral component within the intersectionality of their leadership?
You know, Mary, it's another one of those times I think as leaders, it's important for us to listen first before we act. And especially to my white colleagues on the call today, I want to remind you that when you act, do you act from a place of white privilege, or have you taken the time to understand how people with color, both the patients we serve and their families, and the staff that we work with every day, what their experiences have been? And how does that then shape how the organization responds to what they've heard and what they've witnessed within their healthcare settings? So I think it's another one of those moments that before we step forward and say, I'm going to fix this, it's going to take all of us together, because this is not like the civil rights movement in the 60s, which was about changing policies and laws. This is about a cultural movement, and I can't reinforce that enough, that this is a moment that people are crying out for a change in the culture in this country and a change in the culture within our healthcare organizations.
Kevin, the next question for you is, around the globe, COVID-19 has impacted individuals and families. People have been socially isolated, experienced significant trauma, unimaginable grief, and have faced incredible economic hardships, to name a few. Mental health is a deep concern for many in the healthcare community. What impact do you see these challenges have on individual recovery and post-traumatic growth? And what can leaders do to address the necessary system changes in real time?
So, you know, Mary, I think first of all, we have to admit as leaders that we're struggling too. I mean, for the first time in my career, I've dealt with many crises, but this is such a long-term crisis and also a long-term impact on our personal and professional lives. There have been moments where I've struggled with anxiety because of the weight that I feel on the shoulders of making sure we can care for the people in our communities, keep our staff and faculty safe. And so being able to tell others how you're feeling during that time, I think is step number one, that they recognize the authenticity of leaders experiencing that also. But second of all, recognizing on every call I'm on now across our system, I'm reminding people to take care of one another. I'm reminding people to be sure that they look out for one another. And if they see a colleague who's struggling, to sit down and talk to them and encourage them to get help. Because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And as I said in the talk, right now we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There was already a problem with resilience before we went into this. And if we're going to have a healthy workforce long term, we have to become more creative in how we become flexible in managing our workforce and support our workforce moving forward.
Kevin, we are at a critical moment in our society and country. Our leadership has to not only guide teams, protect communities, and provide clarity of mission, but also encourage the next generation to lead with purpose. How does a leader not only calmly lead in crisis, but mentor others to do the same in the future?
There's a couple things I'd say to that, Mary. To the folks who are on the call today, whose organization leadership makeup does not reflect what their community looks like, I challenge you each and every year to mentor someone from an underrepresented minority group. It is all of our responsibility to advance a leadership team that is a reflection of the people we serve and the people who work within our organization. I would also challenge us that in the midst of this crisis, that we openly share, not just with the people we're mentoring, but with all of our leadership, the lessons that we're learning. Because many of the people who are now leading our organizations didn't live through HIV, didn't live through some of Ebola. When I go back and look at who is leading some of our organizations, they did not have those experiences, which shaped you and I as leaders. And so taking those lessons learned and embedding them into the leadership journey and how we mentor and coach people.
Lastly, Kevin, in your opinion, looking ahead to the future and what lies on the horizon for health equity, and social justice, what must nurse leaders do to ensure that change is not just for a moment, but leads to an actionable movement that is sustainable over time?
First of all, I would challenge us to come together. You know, it's the year of the nurse. It's an interesting time that they chose to highlight the year of the nurse, not knowing what was going to happen in 2020. But it's a real reflection of how we as nurses need to find ourselves at a variety of different tables at all levels of federal government, state government, city government, of our healthcare institutions, of our schools, because the role we can play in changing how people see healthcare in our communities, which then translates long-term to healthier outcomes. The influence nurses have, like I said, when people come together and share a common passion, anything is possible. And so coming together and sharing that common passion, I think in this moment in time is incredibly important for nursing.
Thank you, Kevin. Although virtual, let's give Kevin Sowers, president of the Johns Hopkins Health System and executive vice president for Johns Hopkins Medicine, a warm virtual applause for this incredible kickoff to our conference, In Crisis and Calm, Leading with Purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure having been with you today.